November 18, 1942, dawn over Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. A violet glow on the horizon. The air, still sticky from humid night storms, shimmered as the sun pierced treetops. A Japanese Zero pilot swept his gaze across the jungle-scarped airfield. Below, in the rosy light, surfaces glowed corrugated, tents stirred, engines warmed. His hands gripped the stick. Each breath felt thin. For 3 years he had flown with a promise of supremacy, an unchallenged air, where his Mitsubishi AA6M0 danced above any enemy that dared to show. Today, though, he sensed something new. Before the P-38 arrived, the Zero wasn't just a plane, it was legend. Turn radius tight enough to spin inside almost any Allied fighter. Maximum speed near 332 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, climbing swiftly, with the nimbleness to outmaneuver. Range so long it could patrol far from carriers, escort bombers, hunt enemy airfields, then slip home buzzing like a comfortable ghost. Men like Saburo Soke flew that myth. Fight in the sun, outrun the foe, come back with bullet holes but pride intact. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai would brief his pilots, prepare for Wildcats or P-40s maybe. No doubt we'll rule that sky again. Japan's doctrine was built on grace, agility, and trust that the skies belonged to them. By early to mid-1942, rumors stirred in the Pacific haze. Reports of a strange American fighter, twin engines, twin booms, thick nose, heavy firepower. Japanese intelligence passed them along. Commanders scoffed. How can a twin-engine beast climb past a Zero? Ridiculous. Maintenance officers from frontline bases reported seeing silhouettes in the distance. But the doctrine of invincibility shut ears. The Zero was light, maneuverable, and pilots expected to meet ability, not power. Lockheed's P-38 Lightning was drawn from a different philosophy. A 1937 USAAC specification demanded something radical. A high-altitude interceptor with heavy armament, speed, and reach, something the Zero was never designed to counter. Key design that startled pilots. Twin Allison V1710 engines, each with turbo-superchargers, allowing performance high in the sky. P-38 could maintain power at altitudes where Zero pilots felt pressure drop and throttle fade. Concentrated firepower, 4 50 caliber machine guns plus a 20mm cannon in the nose, no convergence issues as with wing-mounted guns. Every shot was deadly and forward. First production model with armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks, unlike the early Zeros which sacrificed protection for agility. By November 1942, earlier mechanical quirks were being ironed out. Engine cooling, dive compressibility issues, prop efficiency. The aircraft still required respect to fly properly, but it no longer felt brittle. Morning broke on November 18th. Henderson field workers heard thunder at altitude before seeing its source. Lightnings climbed, tall and twin-tailed, climbing fast. Pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, new in P-38s, tossed aside their P-40 habits and opened throttles on twin engines. Escorting B-17s, they strained for altitude. From the base, green fields turned to jungle labyrinth beneath. Above them, Japanese Zero soared, confident. A Zero squadron leader glanced down, saw unfamiliar shapes. He barked orders. Intercept. The P-38s pulled ahead. They rose past 20,000 feet, past what many Zeros could comfortably maintain. The young Zero pilot glanced upward. The aircraft ahead already held a height advantage. Seconds later, Lightnings dove, disciplined, precise. A burst from 50 cals and 20mm cannon slashed through formation. An escorting Zero jerk, flames leaping from its wing root. The Zero tried to turn a gentle roll, tight bank, but control surfaces stiffened. Speed increased, maneuverability dropped. Above 250 miles per hour, the Zero responded slowly. Above 300 miles per hour, pilots found response lagging, rudders heavy, ailerons sluggish. Lightning pilots climbed away, throttles roaring, altitude held. Zeros wheeled, panting in thinner air, chasing phantoms. From this first engagement, 3 Japanese aircraft were claimed by P-38s of the 339. Not huge numbers, but symbolic. It was not just about kills, it was about how they were achieved. Using altitude, diving attacks, retreating before enemy retaliation, and the shock of being unable to chase. For Zero pilots, the psychological impact was immediate. Their doctrine of turning fights, of speed in low altitudes, no longer assured victory. The Zero's early strengths revealed built-in vulnerabilities. No hydraulic boosting control surfaces became heavy at high speed. Turn rate high at lower speeds, but above certain thresholds, agility collapsed. Lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, a single burst or cannon shell often meant fire or fatal damage. Zeros were fragile in sustained combat. Engine performance dropped off greatly above 25,000 feet. Turbocharging, pressurization absent or weak. Against the P-38, which maintained better performance up high, controlled dive speeds, and firepower centered in nose, these weaknesses were deadly. Back at Rabaul and other Japanese command centers, debriefs filled with uncertain words. They came from above. They dove. We could not pursue. Veterans like Sakai wrote in journals. We knew speed, but not this speed. We knew climb, but not this climb. Rumors of a new enemy shape turned to reports. Patterns. Losses. The math was being rewritten. That November day did more than bruise Japanese pride. It foreshadowed many coming battles. The P-38's presence would enable long-range interception missions, including the operation against Admiral Yamamoto. It would force changes in Japanese tactics, avoid altitude disadvantages, avoid extended turns, fear the dive. The industrial effort behind Lockheed, partner factories, American supply lines meant more Lightnings were arriving, better versions, refined models. For Japanese pilots, for their commanders, Guadalcanal became the place where they first truly saw. Maybe the skies were not invincible. Above the tangled jungle, the roar of twin engines broke doctrines. November 18, 1942 was more than a date. It was the point where Japanese dominance cracked, not shattered yet, but visibly, dangerously creaking. As the Zero pilot watched his enemy fade into the clouds, he carried two truths: that this Lightning was unlike anything he had trained to fight, and that from now on, every climb, every dogfight, every mission would be played on a different board. Those who believed in air superiority would have to relearn what it meant to dominate. Sunlight filters through jungle canopy, turning leaves into trembling patterns of gold and shadow. Down on Guadalcanal, the air smells of salt, sweat, and aviation fuel. Japanese pilots returned to base, wounded, confused, but alive. They've flown against the strange silhouettes, the P-38 Lightnings, and survived. But what they report is unsettling. These American fighters are faster, climb harder, and dive deeper. A Zero pilot, debriefing in a tent at Rabaul, can barely mask his tension. I felt the climb. It wasn't same as before. They pulled ahead. The myth of invincibility, long unchallenged, senses the first crack. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was not a bad plane. Far from it. Light airframe, minimal armor, but incredible agility. Excellent maneuverability at low speed. It starred in many early Pacific battles, Philippines, Singapore, Wake Island, often with little opposition that could match its turning ability and climb in fights under 20,000 feet. Yet that very philosophy, lightweight, tight turns, pilot skill, became a limitation in other regimes. Above certain altitudes, the Zero's single engine began to lose performance. Turbo or supercharging technology were not used effectively. Performance dropped off. It lacked armor protection and self-sealing tanks in early models, vulnerable to gunfire and incendiary rounds. Its top speed around 330-350 miles per hour, depending on model/altitude, was good in low altitudes, but couldn't keep up with newer Allied designs in dives or climbs from above. Japanese pilots, like Saburo Saki, later wrote that while the Zero felt unbeatable in tight, turning fights, it became less sure when preyed upon from altitude, when speed was used as a weapon. Confidence matters in war. Belief in one's equipment shapes decisions in the sky. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces credited with 64 victories, was raised in a culture of warrior honor, tradition, and belief in mastery. Pilots were taught that aerial combat was art, who could outrun whom, who could stay in sun, who could force the enemy into mistakes. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, known as the Prince of Rebol for his skill and command, often encouraged daring, dogfights, swift maneuvers, tight turning circles. These were qualities that made Japanese pilots fearsome in early engagements. The Zero was more than plain, it was a symbol. It carried on board the expectation that Japanese aviators would always dance above others. Early in 1942, scattered Allied intelligence noted glimpses of a twin-engine American fighter. But Japanese command dismissed many reports as exaggerations. How could a twin-engine plane able to outclimb Zero? Ridiculous. Doctrine didn't foresee speed plus altitude mastery as threats. Then came Saburo Sakai's reflections. The P-38 first used in combat against the Zeros appeared to lack any distinctive features, except speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. He noted that initially, American pilots tried turning fights with Zeros, which went poorly, but they adopted boom and zoom style, used altitude as advantage. To really get what the Japanese pilots were up against, here are the critical comparisons between P-38 Lightning and Zero. Feature P-38 Lightning Mitsubishi A6M0. Engines twin Allison V1710s, turbo-supercharged, enabling strong performance at altitude. Single radial engine, strong performance at lower altitude but power falls off higher. Top speed tilde 400-420 miles per hour varied by variant and altitude. Tilde 330-350 miles per hour in best conditions. Service ceiling up to tilde 44,000 feet on some P-38 models, or capable operational ceilings above 30,000 feet for many versions. Performance drops at higher altitudes, less effective above tilde 25, 0 to 30,000 feet. Armament nose concentrated, 4 multiplied, 50 cal machine guns plus 20 mm cannon concentrated, no wing convergence needed. Early Zeros had two 7.7 mm. 30 cal machine guns plus two 20 mm cannons, but lighter bullet calibers and less concentrated firepower. Protection and survivability: armor and cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, rugged construction, twin engines for redundancy, very light protection, fuel tanks exposed, vulnerable to bullets/incendiaries. Single engine equal fatal damage risk. These differences weren't academic, they were the difference between life and death in emerging air combats. In the skies around Guadalcanal, Japanese pilots flew many missions expecting turning fights. But P-38s changed the terrain of engagement. They used boom and zoom tactics. Climb high, dive down, fire from above, then climb back. They used their high-altitude performance to choose the moment and the angle of attack. Saburo Sakai observed that when P-38 struck from above, the Zero's legendary maneuverability was worthless. They couldn't dodge fast diving attacks, and when Zero pilots tried to follow, they found their controls becoming heavy, catches in turbulence disrupting tight rolls. Japanese reports started describing the P-38 as an airplane that forces the fight on its own terms. One Japanese pilot, voice trembling in later interviews, described the first time he saw a P-38 above altitude he thought safe. It appeared above us like a phantom. We tried to engage. It came down fast, unleashed fire, and vanished. I watched it disappear in the clouds. I felt powerless. Stories like this spread in units. Confidence cracked. Over time, Japanese pilots began to avoid combat unless they had altitude advantage, or to simply fly lower and hope not to be spotted. This shifted doctrine. Move away from pure turning duels towards more caution, reconnaissance, preservation of aircraft. As 1942 turned toward 1943, Japanese air forces found their edge dimming. Experienced aces were shot down, killed, or wounded. They had less time to train new pilots to the same standard. Aircraft fatigue. Earlier models of Zero were becoming outmoded, lacking upgrades in engine power, armor, protection. Increased deployment of P-38s, plus improved tactics by American pilots, made the skies more dangerous for Japanese. At the same time, Japanese pilot rotation and rest were rare. Many flew until exhaustion, until no more fuel, until enemy fire ended them. Meanwhile, American production and pilot training were scaling. By the end of these early engagements, it was no longer debatable. The Zero could no longer assume the sky was its domain. Japanese doctrine, molded by years of dominance, was under pressure. Their confidence, once an unbreakable shield, was now a fissured facade. In early 1937, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a specification that sounded almost impossible. Design a fighter that could intercept enemy aircraft at high altitude, maintain speed, carry deadly weapons, and be sturdy enough for long-range missions. Lockheed's chief engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson took on that challenge. He designed a twin-engine aircraft with turbo-supercharged Allison V-1710 engines, twin booms with a central fuselage pod, and concentrated firepower in the nose. Imagine this: two V-1710s, each producing about 1,475 horsepower in the later P-38L versions, mounted with turbo-superchargers, so that power didn't fade with altitude as it did in many single-engine fighters. This wasn't just faster hardware. It was a different philosophy. Trade off turning ability, accept bulk, and instead dominate the sky with raw energy and altitude. Where the Zero had built its legend on agility and dogfighting, the P-38 intended to be something else entirely. Let's lay down some numbers. These are not side facts. They were the milestones that redefined air combat. Speed. The P-38L Lightning could reach a maximum speed of about 414 miles per hour in level flight. Ceiling. It could reach upwards of 40,000 feet operational ceiling, letting it soar into skies where many Zeros couldn't even breathe well. Range. With drop tanks, the P-38 had the long reach needed for Pacific Island hopping, escorting bombers, reconnaissance, or interception missions. Armament. 4 50 cal machine guns plus a 20mm cannon in the nose, no wing guns, no convergence worries. If you aimed, you hit. For contrast, the Zero's top speeds hovered around 330-350 miles per hour depending on variant and altitude, with very good climb and turn at lower altitudes but performance bleeding off high up. When you juxtapose those numbers, P-38 speed at altitude, heavy firepower, and range versus the Zero's strengths light, maneuverable, excellent at lower altitude, a picture emerges. This is not just threat, it's revolution. But the P-38 was not perfect on day one. As with any technical beast, it needed taming. Pilots remember early complaints, cockpit heating issues, engine cooling problems under heavy load, and control heaviness in certain dives. Visibility in the cockpit, especially looking aft, was limited by the twin-boom design. Adjustment was required. War emergency power on engines sometimes stressed systems beyond safe limits. Yet, each failure became a lesson. Engineers refined the P-38J and L models. Better war emergency settings, heat control, improved armor, better cooling, more efficient props. By late 1942, when Guadalcanal saw P-38s in larger numbers, many of those kinks were being worked out. Pilots were more confident. Tactics improved. The Lightning was starting to fly like it had always been meant to. Japanese pilots, especially aces like Saburo Sakai, paid attention. He later reflected on what it was like facing this new machine. The P-38 first used in combat against the Zeros appeared to lack any distinctive features other than speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. That quote carries weight. Sakai admitted that early on, the Lightning didn't look significantly impressive until it started performing. Until it dove. Until it climbed above you. Until it hit. From his perspective, the Zero pilots' defenses were being tested in ways they had never been before. Tactics followed design. It was no longer viable for American pilots to try dogfighting against the Zero. They needed altitude and speed. They needed to poke from above and dive away. Boom and zoom. Climb high. Let gravity do part of the work. Strike fast with bundles of 50 cal and cannon rounds, then zoom back. This tactic exploited the P-38's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses. Zero pilots, used to close-turning fights, found themselves at a disadvantage. The P-38 rarely stayed in tight turning circles. It used its altitude to avoid being caught. Japanese reports begin to note frustration when the Lightning dives fast. The Zero can't follow safely. Control surfaces heat up, responses slow. At high speed, aerodynamic forces become punishing. While Guadalcanal's first fights hinted at the power, a few key missions proved it, where the Lightning truly shone. The shoot-down of Admiral Yamamoto's aircraft in April 1943, Operation Vengeance, is one. A long-range interception that required speed, altitude, navigation, and surprise. The Lightning's ability to fly long distances, climb, and deliver heavy firepower made that mission possible. In later Pacific engagements, Lightnings were used as fighter bombers, going after ground and sea targets, strafe runs, dive attacks, bomber escort. Their range and durability let them stay in combat longer. Each mission reinforced what designers had built into the Lightning: speed, altitude, firepower, and survival. From Japanese view, the Lightning was no longer rumor or odd silhouette. It became the new reality. A Japanese ace-flying patrol over Guadalcanal would expect Zeros to dominate high-altitude battles. Now they found themselves being bypassed, outrun, outclimbed. Training manuals were rethought. Mission briefings included altitude warnings. Pilots were ordered to avoid certain fights unless they had altitude or element of surprise. The doctrine of dogfights and turning battles lost favor. Fight on your own terms became a necessity, not an option. The Lightning had arrived, not just in numbers, but in performance. The Zero's legend, built on maneuvers and morale, was being tested by numbers and engineering. April 18, 1943. A day that Japanese naval aviation would never forget. Codebreakers in U.S. intelligence had intercepted Japanese communications. Admiral Yamamoto was flying from Rewrote toward Bougainville. The mission was dubbed Operation Vengeance. The Lightning was essential. Wildcats or F-4s couldn't reach the range. P-38 Lightnings alone had range, speed, and altitude to carry out this mission. Major John W. Mitchell led 18 P-38s from the 339th, 12th, and 70th Fighter Squadrons. Their task: intercept Yamamoto's 2G-4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zeros. One aircraft damaged, one had mechanical issues, but formation pressed on. They flew in radio silence, using drop tanks for extra fuel. As they approached the assigned intercept point, Mitchell ordered release of external tanks, fired throttles full, and climbed aggressively to altitude. In that mission, the P-38's performance shone. With drop tanks, Lightnings had enough fuel to fly till 435 miles from Guadalcanal, reach intercept, engage, and return. The armament: 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon in nose, lethal at close and medium ranges. Climb and speed allowed them to approach the bombers from above, surprising the Zero escorts. Their dive after engagement was blistering, as was their ability to pull away. The mission required precise navigation, timing, altitude, all things the P-38 was engineered to excel at. Despite some accounts varying, one of the Betty bombers was destroyed in this action. Yamamoto was killed. The Admiral's death rocked Japanese military morale. This proved that P-38 was not just a fighter. It was a strategic weapon. Earlier specs had already hinted at raw ability. P-38 could climb till 20,000 feet in 6 minutes under certain conditions, at speeds near or exceeding 400 miles per hour in level flight. This contrasted sharply with the Zero's falling performance at high altitudes. Japanese sources later admitted that above 25 0 to 30 000 feet, the Zero's engine and airframe couldn't maintain the same responsiveness. Control stiffened, climb slowed, streamlining less effective. The P-38s used this power to dominate altitude, climb high, gain energy, then dive with speed and hit. The Zero pilots found themselves reacting, not controlling. Eagle in the sky roles reversed. Lightning pilots emphasized dive tactic attacks rather than turning dogfights. They used altitude advantage to attack from above, then climb back before Zeros could respond. Use of drop tanks, precise navigation, fuel management, and situational awareness became critical. P-38 pilots trained to use long corridors of sky, shadowing islands, hiding until the right moment. Japanese tactical briefings adjusted: avoid engaging lightnings above certain altitudes. Avoid staying in tight turning fights when lightnings have energy advantage. Attempt to repel with escorts or force lightnings into slower climb zones. That intercept mission Operation Vengeance had deeper consequences beyond killing Yamamoto. It proved that with intelligence plus technology plus industrial support, even the best Japanese pilots and doctrine could be outmatched. It broke a psychological barrier. Japanese command realized their adversary could plan precise long-range missions, fly fast, reach high, fight audaciously. The Lightning became a symbol of that change. Design brilliance, hard engineering, and decisive tactics converged in moments like Operation Vengeance to shift the war. The P-38 Lightning had become more than a plane. It was a catalyst. Guadalcanal, August, September, November 1942. The island was a furnace of conflict. Air raids, jungle combat, burnt-out equipment, desperate pilots. Both sides knew that the skies above Henderson Field would decide much of the campaign. The P-38 Lightnings of the 339th and other squadrons were now flying escort missions for bombers, ground attack sorties, reconnaissance, gradually expanding their boots on Guadalcanal's throat. Zeros still prowled the skies, confident, swift, familiar. But each mission arrived with growing tension. Zero pilots saw new patterns. Lightnings perched high, attacking from above. Zeros tried to engage but found themselves at disadvantage when speed, altitude, and dive power came into play. It wasn't just physical combat, it was mental. One of the names that must be etched in golden letters when discussing P-38 impact is Richard I. Bong. Born in Wisconsin, farm boy turned fighter ace, Bong's story is mythic. He flew missions over New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Over time, Bong amassed 40 confirmed aerial victories in P-38s, making him America's top ace in the Pacific. In November 1942, before many P-38s were fully accepted, Bong had already destroyed 5 Japanese fighter planes, showing early on what Lightning pilots could do even under imperfect conditions. His aircraft, named Marge in honor of his girlfriend Marjorie Vattendahl, became symbolic of the P-38's toughness and aggressiveness. Bong's mindset mattered. He understood that turning fights were fatal. He emphasized energy fights, altitude, speed, aggression from above. His victories weren't just about skill, they were about tactics aligned with what the Lightning was built to do. April 18, 1943, Operation Vengeance. Probably the most famous P-38 mission. Intelligence intercepts had revealed Admiral Yamamoto's exact travel plan. U.S. codebreakers decrypted signals. They knew when and how he would travel. Only aircraft capable of the required round trip with sufficient range and speed were P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Squadron. Major John W. Mitchell led 18 P-38s equipped with drop tanks, armed with 4 50 cal machine guns plus 20 mm cannon each. They climbed, navigated precisely, intercepted Yamamoto's bomber formation escorted by Zeros. When the plane carrying Yamamoto was shot down, the psychological effect in Japan was immediate. Yamamoto was not just an admiral, he was a symbol, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor. His death meant more than leadership loss. It meant that even strategic and revered figures were now vulnerable. The invincibility myth cracked wide open. After Yamamoto's loss, Japanese air strategy shifted. Zeros could no longer assume superiority in all aerial domains. Climb profile, altitude, dive capability now mattered. Doctrines built on dogfighting and maneuverability needed revising, but Japan struggled with resources and pilot training deficits. Japanese aces later confessed that they were shocked at the P-38's performance. not in close fight, but in hit-and-run diving attacks, altitude superiority. Saburo Sakai specifically remarked that initially P-38s looked unremarkable until they used speed from above. The psychological strain was real. Pilots who once boasted of dominating skies by maneuvers now feared being caught by unseen attackers from above. Zeros could be outrun. They could not chase every Lightning, especially when above. P-38G models in Operation Vengeance were fitted with drop tanks so they could travel long distances, range advantage, something Zero couldn't match. Climb rate. Lightnings climbed to interception altitude before Japanese formations could react, gaining energy advantage. Firepower. Nose-mounted cannons and guns meant accuracy. No need to rely on wing convergence. Zero's disadvantages surfaced starkly in these battles. Lower power at high altitude meant they lost climb speed. No armor or protection, so hits from Lightnings often resulted in fatal system failures. Tactics not suited for dive attacks from altitude or steep dives, dogfighting, once strength, became liability. Roger Ames, one of the pilots on Yamamoto mission, later described pressing full throttle under stars, climbing silently, eyes glued to his instruments, listening only for throttle roar and wind. When he saw the enemy formation below, he didn't hesitate. Attack came, surprises, retaliation, chaos. Lightning struck, Zeros tried to respond. Another story. A Japanese Zero pilot, after being repeatedly outclimbed and forced into energy-losing situations, wrote to his family about how the Lightning's dive felt like the sky itself was coming alive beneath him, a roar in altitude he had never known. These are not glories of victory only. They are confessions of fear, of doctrine upended, of belief shattered. After the Yamamoto mission and Guadalcanal clashes, American pilot morale surged. Lightning pilots were proving that they not only survived but dominated in situations previously considered dangerous, if not impossible. Japan's naval aviation leadership scrambled to adjust. Demands for newer aircraft, revisions of pilot training, including climb rate awareness, dive training, tactics avoiding altitude disadvantage. But many of these came too late. Industrial scale advantaged Americans, more Lightnings built, improved models, better tactics, more pilots. Zeros too had newer models, but unable to catch up in every metric. The wars in sky were now deeply changed. Altitude, speed, range had become essential. Dogfights and low-altitude superiority alone could no longer win. By mid-1943, the skies above the Pacific had become a war of exhaustion. The Mitsubishi A6M0 squadrons, once full of veteran aces, now were stretched beyond their breaking point. Every mission cost something: fuel, crew, spirit. Japanese pilot training, which had once been elite, was fraying. Many of the instructor cadre were lost. New pilots had fewer flight hours, less experience climbing to higher altitudes or handling high-speed dives. Maintenance shortages meant worn-out Zeros flew with weakened engines, leak-prone fuel tanks, and fragile frames. Meanwhile, American P-38 pilots were gaining confidence with each sortie. They were learning how to use the Lightning's altitude, speed, and firepower not just as theoretical advantages, but real ones. Their losses were serious, yes, but their returns often greater. They began to dictate the terms of the fight. Early in the war, Japanese pilots had unparalleled skill. Dogfighting was second nature. Tight turns, sun attacks, and ambushes were their tools. But doctrine, by its nature, resists change. In contrast, P-38 units were often composed of pilots transferring from P-40 and P-39 squadrons. They already had experience with Japanese tactics and their limitations. Those pilots, encountering the Lightning, realized that turning fights with Zeros were death traps. Instead, they flew energy tactics, holding altitude, making fast dives, then climbing back into safety. Japanese records, including aces like Saburo Sakai, began to admit that the P-38 appeared to lack any distinctive features other than speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. That admission is telling. It shows that while early on Japanese pilots saw only silhouette and speed, They gradually understood that those features, used with discipline, were deadly. Voices from the Pacific reflect this shift. Saburo Sakai. The P-38 first used in combat against the Zeros appeared to lack any distinctive features other than speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. Others reported being unable to press attacks, being forced into retreats by attacks from above, and suffering losses because their aircraft couldn't reach or match the energy states of P-38s. One Japanese wartime journal entry described seeing a P-38 sweep down from the sky like a thunderbolt, fire ripping through our formation before we could even form up. These aren't legends, they're confessions. Fear growing in the pit of even battle-hardened pilots. Numbers reinforce what witnesses saw. The P-38 is credited with destroying more Japanese aircraft than any other USAAF fighter in the Pacific Theater. Operation Vengeance, in April 1943, showed P-38s could fly long overwater missions, intercept key enemy targets Admiral Yamamoto's flight, and execute with precision. P-38s, especially in G models, equipped with drop tanks, had extended range not available to many Japanese fighters or their escorts. This forced Japanese formations to either stay closer to base, making them predictable, or risk overextended operations with tenuous fuel margins. Simultaneously, Japanese aircraft repair facilities, supply convoys, spare parts pipeline, these all suffered under constant Allied pressure. Every damaged Zero cost not just a plane but a pilot, training slots, spare parts, morale. The P-38's twin engines and fuel capacity allowed it to go beyond what single-engine fighters could. It escorted bombers, scouted, attacked ground targets, all in the same campaign. Japanese strategy became more reactive. They tried to draw Lightnings into unfavorable terrain, force low-altitude fights, or use cloud cover. But the P-38s often arrived from unexpected angles, covered by intelligence. Islands, airfields, supply lines all became vulnerable. Control of Henderson Field and similar positions gave the U.S. bases to launch more Lightnings into Japanese airspace. The pressure built, not just in aerial kills, but in denying Japan freedom of action. Here are specific encounters that showcased this decline. Operation Vengeance, April 18, 1943. P-38s flying from Guadalcanal intercepted Yamamoto's flight. With high altitude, speed, armament, they achieved what many thought impossible, taking out a major Japanese commander in his own transport. Operation KE, January 1943. In one daylight raid, a force including P-38s intercepted Japanese aircraft. P-38s contributed to Zeros lost without repeal. Small but cumulative losses in Guadalcanal skirmishes. Japanese Zeros began to lose not just pilots but experienced ones. The balance of experienced versus rookies swung toward the Americans. Each loss, each surprise from above, chipped away at confidence. One pilot thinking, if I can't climb, I can't survive. If they dive past me, I can't escape. Belief is half the battle. Once Japanese pilots and commanders believed they could be outclimbed, outrun, and outshot, the doctrine started to crumble. Mission briefs changed. Pilots were told to avoid high-altitude engagements unless they had tactical advantage. Japanese radars and observer posts began tracking Lightnings coming in, but the speed and unpredictability made response difficult. Loss of morale. Veterans writing letters home, diary entries express shock, desperation. They flew toward the sky, formerly theirs, now marked by enemy silhouettes climbing past. At the strategic level, Japanese capacity to hold territory, support frontline troops, supply reinforcements, all was increasingly threatened. Air superiority was not just about wins. It was about safety, logistics, supply, and morale. The P-38 Lightning was no longer a curiosity. It was a weapon of strategic consequence. Each fight, each sortie uncertain, weighed more than just bullets. They accumulated as psychological and material losses. Now, with the transformation underway, Japanese air forces were on defense, not just in sky, but in spirit. By late 1944 and into 1945, the P-38 Lightning had proved itself in nearly every major battle over the Pacific. Guadalcanal, New Guinea, the Solomon Islands. All theaters had felt its speed, range, and punch. But now, with Japan losing territory, fuel, pilots, air superiority wasn't just about winning fights in the sky. It was about erasing the idea of dominance. The P-38 kept flying, escorting bombers, performing reconnaissance, ground attack, night missions. Its variants like reconnaissance conversions, the F-5 versions mapped enemy territory. Its durability let many Lightnings come home battered, but alive. Japanese pilots, aces and rookies alike, began speaking of the P-38 with a mix of respect and dread. Intelligence reports warned squadrons, avoid the Lightning unless you have altitude and tactical surprise. Constant tension. The fork-tailed devil could, and often did, strike from places you thought safe. Roger J. Ames, one of the P-38 pilots in Operation Vengeance, the mission to intercept Admiral Yamamoto, later described the Lightning in glowing terms. Not only the only aircraft with the range and speed for that long mission, but central to how the Allies could project power deep in Japanese territory. From the Japanese side, in the shocking truth about what Japan thought of the P-38 Lightning, pilots spoke of constant tension, knowing a P-38 could strike anywhere, and of watching damaged Lightnings limp back with worse wounds than crews of lighter fighters could survive. Their aircraft might be crippled, but many Lightnings made it home, unlike many more vulnerable Japanese fighters. The name Fork-tailed Devil became one used by both allies and enemies to express a grudging respect. Zeros that once laughed at the twin tails were later wary when Lightnings appeared on the horizon. No story of the P-38 is complete without its top scores. Richard Dick Bong scored 40 confirmed aerial victories in P-38s, making him America's top ace in that aircraft. Thomas B. McGuire Jr., another P-38 ace with 38 kills, nearly matched Bong. Their exploits became legend among pilot peers. The P-38 flew thousands of combat sorties. It served not just as a fighter, but in roles including photo reconnaissance, bomber escort, fighter bomber, night fighter, and long-range patrol duties. Its versatility was unmatched in many parts of the Pacific theater. After World War II, the P-38's innovations shaped aerial doctrine and future aircraft. The use of twin engines with turbo-superchargers for high-altitude performance was one of the forward-looking features that influenced designs in later fighters. Its reconnaissance versions F-4, F-5 continued to be used for mapping, intelligence gathering, and aerial surveying, a reminder that speed, altitude, and range provide more than just aerial firepower. In popular memory, and in air shows, restored Lightnings remain icons. Their preservation tells a story of innovation and endurance. The fact that so many P-38s survive and fly even today demonstrates how rugged they were built. Warfare history and simple flying commentary. Perhaps the deepest legacy isn't in numbers alone, but in how aerial combat philosophy changed. Before P-38, dogfights turns, seeing each other, maneuver were romanticized in Japanese doctrine. P-38 forced the idea of energy combat, altitude, speed, surprise. Boom and zoom became standard. Maneuverability lost its once unquestioned priority. Japanese pilot reports noted that encountering P-38s was different. You didn't expect them to just chase you, they'd climb above you, dive, attack, then vanish. Even when wounded, many Lightnings could limp back, fueling morale in American ranks and frustrating Japanese ones. Moreover, intelligence and code breaking in Yamamoto's case showed that the P-38 was not just a tool, it was part of strategic advantage. Projecting force over thousands of miles, intercepting key enemy leaders, interdicting supply lines. The psychological effect of knowing the enemy could reach you even in safe skies was profound. Picture this: a Japanese pilot, after the Yamamoto mission, returning to a runway in Rabaul. He looks skyward and doesn't hear the familiar whine of a Zero. Instead, from somewhere high above, he hears a different roar, twin-engined, relentless. He glances up, coordinates height, surprise. He knows he cannot climb fast enough, cannot outrun, cannot outrun this. That moment, taken hundreds of times by many, defined the end of Japan's aerial myth. The P-38 Lightning's legacy is more than stories of kills and battles. It's a testament to industrial innovation meeting tactical doctrine, of speed and altitude winning where dogmatic maneuver failed. It taught that you can challenge seemingly invincible myths with engineering, intelligence, and daring. That air superiority is not inherited, it is built, fought, and sometimes very painfully earned. For Japanese pilots, for Allied aces, for the future of aerial warfare, the P-38 was a turning point when the sky was no longer a domain of confidence, but of uncertainty, tilt to those who could adapt, who had speed, who controlled height. Japanese pilots, aces and rookies alike, began speaking of the P-38 with a mix of respect and dread. Intelligence reports warned squadrons, avoid the Lightning unless you have altitude and tactical surprise. Constant tension. The fork-tailed devil could, and often did, strike from places you thought safe. As Saburo Sakai later reflected, the P-38 first used in combat against the Zeros appeared to lack any distinctive features other than speed at great altitudes and very high diving speed. It was no longer possible for the Zero fighters to successfully engage the P-38, except under the most unusual conditions. That admission, from one of Japan's greatest aces, marked not just a moment of fear, but a turning of mindset. Where once the Zero lived off doctrine, dance, and dogma, now it was pressured, pushed into retreat, forced away from its comfort zones. The P-38 Lightning didn't just defeat planes, it shattered belief, rewrote tactics, redefined what raw air superiority meant in the Pacific. When you next see a P-38 in museums, in flyovers, in history books, remember this. It was more than steel and engine. It was the beginning of a new sky, one where altitude, speed, and strategy would outlast tradition and bravado.